My guest today is Rebecca K.S. Ansari, an author of two middle grade books, a former ER doctor, more on that later, and a parent of four noisy kids. I recently read her book, The Missing Piece of Charlie O'Reilly, and I loved it. And so I am so excited to talk to her today about her fantastic page turner. Thank you so much for joining me on E-Train Talks today, Rebecca.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for doing this. It's exciting to watch all the things that you're doing with middle grade novels. It's just wonderful.
Thank you. So, first off, I know you may think I tell all my guests that I love their books, which I kind of do, but I really want you to know that I had so much trouble putting The Missing Piece of Charlie O'Reilly down. I've never read a book quite like it. I remember my mom telling me that it was time for bed, and I begged her to let me stay up longer to read your story. I had to find out the truth about Liam's disappearance, and I have to say, the ending did not disappoint.
Excellent.
So my first question, I'm dying to know, how in the world did you come up with such an imaginatively creative storyline? I won't give away any spoilers, even though I'm dying to share. One thing I can say is that my mom has actually said to me more than once, be careful what you wish for. And so there were many times when your story gave me the chills. So how did you come up with such a creative storyline?
Well, as you said, it's sometimes hard to talk about the plot of this book because there are many twists, turns, and I don't want to give away any spoilers. But it really started with just a really simple idea. The actual nugget at the beginning of the story was that there were two girls who went missing in the real world. And I started thinking about, well, how would a child deal with that if it was their sibling? Or actually originally there were two kids that were missing when I first started writing it, both a sibling of Charlie's and of Anna's. And then it got way too complicated, and I had to, once I figured out more about the story, I had to get rid of that idea. So Lily got a reprieve. She now just is this little sister across the street. But I thought, well, this isn't a very fun story or really a good one for kids, looking at the actual motivation for it. And so I thought, oh, well, you know what makes a story fantastic for kids is, yes, something happened, but only the kids see it. Only the kids know, and all the adults are being stupid and blind and they can't see it. So actually, originally Anna also knew the truth. But again, once I figured out the whys and the hows, that also didn't make sense anymore. So it actually, in the end, I liked it better that Anna just trusted Charlie enough to believe him when no one else could. So that was this tiny seed that I planted. And then I went through a lot of walks through the park and around the lakes, trying to figure out, okay, so I know why Liam disappeared, but I spent a year writing without knowing where. I didn't know. I just knew that I had to set up the beginning of the story as to what Charlie knew and the history of him and Liam, and then just kept writing from there. And slowly little bits would come in and little stories, and I go, oh, that might work. That could work. And then I'd go and try to write a couple scenes with that. And 3 years later, there it is.
Wow, 3 years of brainstorming, 3 years of just creating an amazing story. And it definitely paid off because I love The Missing Piece of Charlie O'Reilly, one of my favorite books.
Yay.
So my next question is, how long did you have the idea for The Missing Piece of Charlie O'Reilly before you put pen to paper, or should I say, fingers to keys?
Yes.
And is there anything you can share about how you came up with such an intriguing storyline?
So the idea, as I was saying with the previous question, that idea of someone's missing, but I don't know why, that took a number of months of just percolating. And I was still working, which again, we will get to that probably later. Yeah. And it wasn't until I stepped away from my full-time job that I could sit down and say, okay, fingers to keys, let's start crafting who these people are. Let's start making these friendships feel real. And then at that point was able to actually, that was kind of the go for the 3-year process. And, being an ER doctor, a lot of what I saw When you're in the emergency room, a lot of the things are accidents, right? There are emergencies that no one planned on being in my care on a given day. And so with that came a lot of times, a lot of feelings of guilt or regret or sadness or feeling like something that you wish you could change if you could go back again. And so those feelings and those ideas, you can see kind of creeping in on some of the storylines inside the book, where it is definitely, what do you do with regret? What do you do with mistakes? How do you move forward when you can't, in fact, move back? So that's where a lot of the things that come to the kids' storylines came from.
Wow, that's really interesting how you incorporated your work as an ER doctor into The Missing Piece of Charlie O'Reilly. Like, you have The Missing Piece of Charlie O'Reilly, a mysterious, just kind of magical book. But you can kind of incorporate your work as an ER doctor, which is real life accidents happening to real life people, into a magical fiction story. I think that's really interesting.
Thank you. It's been fun, especially now working on other novels. Sometimes it takes a second for me to look back and say, well, you in the end like what you did with Charlie, so let's take a moment and think, what would I have done in that moment when I was maybe stumbling or not coming up with today's work very cleanly, and just have faith in that process. Because everybody who writes has a life they can tap into. You can always look back at your own experiences and your own times where you felt sad or happy or amazing or any of those things, and pull those lines into the stories that you write.
Yeah, I love how you incorporated your life as an ER doctor, or just your life in general, into Charlie O'Reilly, into Anna, into Liam, just all of your characters.
Well, I have 4 sons, and each of them at one time or another in reading my books has claimed, this is me. That's me. I know you stole that from me. And I said, well, the character is not you, but that thing that I just maybe threw in that book is absolutely part of our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my next question is that there were just so many components to The Missing Piece of Charlie O'Reilly, and it was thrilling to read. Can you share a bit about your writing process?
So for Charlie, because there were so many pieces, I really enjoy books that have different lines going that you're not really sure how this is all going to come together. And I like reading books where I'm almost, it's more of a, what are you doing kind of, I'm not lost, I'm not confused, but I don't understand how these things are going to work out in the end. And so I enjoy writing the same. Part of my process is pretty jumbled in that I don't enjoy writing linearly. A book is very linear. You have a beginning, middle, and end.
Yeah.
I don't like writing like that, even though the way I do write in the end kind of makes a big mess, which is I just sit down and I say, well, I know at some point this character and this character have to have a fight, or I know this character and this character have to reveal something important. And so I will just write that scene on a given day. And I don't know where it's going to drop in. I don't even know necessarily what's their setting around them is, but I know that this moment, this beat has to happen. And so then when I've got all my beats, I have a big bowl of spaghetti, and I have to then sit there and try to figure out, okay, now which order are they going to be in? You'll see here in the corner of my office is a bunch of Post-it notes. Those are different beats of the current story I'm working on, so that I can take them and move them around and figure out what order does this all need to happen in. And then comes the difficult task of making them seem together in a way that makes any sense whatsoever. So Charlie was all over the place. I used Microsoft Word and had so many files I didn't even know what to do with them all. I now use a different program called Scrivener, which is more for books. It has chapters on the side. And I've actually found that I don't write as well because it makes you be linear. It kind of shows you your whole book. And I was better when I was scattered all over the place and then pulled it all together.
That's a really interesting writing process, how you just kind of, you go all over the place, but sometimes that's a good thing,
Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, I thought I was just a weirdo. There's a name for this kind of writing that I didn't know. It's called String of Pearls. So you just make all your pearls and then you got to string them all together.
Yeah, that's a beautiful name for it, and I think it kind of suits it.
Yeah, yeah. And hopefully it's a beautiful piece of jewelry, not a
Yeah.
nasty piece of jewelry at the end.
So I also like how in your writing process, you don't know where your story is going to take you. You just kind of write what you know is going to happen. And then you incorporate it, you can just put it into your story later on. And I think that's really helpful for a lot of young writers out there, including me. I've had so many writer's blocks. I even made a post about it a couple of days ago. How do I stop having writer's block? I think that's
right. No, and I found that too, because when I sit down and try to say, okay, well, what's the very next scene? What needs to happen next? I get locked. I don't know what has to happen next. So instead, I just say, well, what needs to happen at all? What needs to happen, period? And then go write that and then worry about it later.
Yeah, that's a really interesting philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I did a little research on you, and I was very surprised to find out that you were an ER doctor for 12 years before becoming an author.
Yeah.
Would you mind sharing the story behind your transition from the world of medicine to becoming a full-time writer?
Yeah, I have always enjoyed, in my adult life, I've enjoyed writing, especially after I had kids. I had a blog that I kept for years, just the ridiculous and hilarious stories of raising 4 tiny human beings. And people enjoyed the blog and said, oh, you're such a good writer, you should write more. And I just didn't have space or time for anything more than that. You know, a busy job. My husband was starting a business, tiny kids. We have too many pets. Like, it's just, there was no room for it. But then it actually got to the point where we were completely beyond our own capacity to even live. I was working too much. My husband was working too much. My family was being raised by my own parents as opposed to me. The pets are out of control. It was just my husband and I just said, you know, something has to give. And he said, if you want to stop doing ER work and write instead, we can do that. And it took me a good year to say, I think that's the right choice for me. You know, after spending all that time and energy and years to become that kind of professional, it was actually really hard to step away at first. But then the more it just kind of sat in my head, the more I thought, this is the right choice. This is what I want to do. And I don't know if you read the beginning of Charlie O'Reilly, I'm blanking on the word, the dedication. It's to my sons, and it's always to chase the joy of just one more chapter. I love that sense, just like you opened with, of the like, please don't stop, let's keep reading. What is it? We can't stop there. What's the next chapter? So I really enjoyed being able to chase that instead of, you know, heart attacks and car accidents.
Yeah, it definitely sounds a bit more pleasant to be a
some
writer.
days I wonder, I'll be honest with you, and it's not going very well. I'm like, oh, if I just had a good heart attack right now.
So I think it's really interesting how your husband had a business, you were an ER doctor, everything was going kind of crazy. And then together you kind of just made a smart decision to just kind of take it slow, take it easy, and just become a writer. Although that can also be a little bit more stressful than being an ER doctor sometimes. You just have to you have a deadline, you have 20 chapters you have to write. Oh, and in 2 days you have to rewrite everything. I'm
a very, very straight to the point kind of person. Obviously, that's kind of what an ER doc personality is. And it is actually more frightening sometimes to sit in front of a computer and have no idea what I'm going to do today. Like when I went to work, I knew what to do. When things came in, I knew what the program was. I knew how to treat it. This is a whole leap of faith. Writing takes a great act of believing that something good's going to happen. And it's hard sometimes.
So I'm really looking forward to reading your newest book, The In-Between. And I'm wondering if there's anything you can share about the story without giving away any big spoilers.
For sure. So The In-Between is a different story entirely. It's not a sequel. And it is the story of Cooper and Jess, brother and sister. And they're both still reeling from their parents' divorce. Their father has left, but in very different ways. And they notice there's a new girl who's moved in across the back alley of their home. And that girl just sits and stares at them and never talks to them. And they together try to figure out what's her deal, what's her story. And she's wearing a school uniform with an emblem. And so they decide to go try to figure out, well, okay, where does she go to school? We'll start there. And the only thing that they can find as they look online is the only place that emblem ever appears is through events they find in the past that are each rather tragic. And they have to then wonder, well, what's that mean now? So that's the beginning of the in-between.
Well, I want to read that right now. That sounds
very good.
That just sounds like a whole interesting process, and like how that emblem appears in history. I think that's a really interesting kind of way to write that's interesting style.
Yeah. And I mean, my stories tend to go a little creepy, a little spooky, a little dark. So sometimes there's this balance between being a little over the top with that. But then I also have an enormous amount of trust for readers your age. I know you guys go dark sometimes in your own minds. I know you see the world around us and think, this is heavy. And so I really do like to trust you guys with things that are maybe a little hard to look at, but then help kind of figure out, so what do you do with that?
So have you always been drawn to mysteries, or are there any other book genres you enjoy more?
No, I love mysteries. I love the sense of, okay, you have put something in front of me that has an answer and I don't know it yet.
Yeah.
And if you think of it, I mean, being an ER doctor is all about solving a mystery, right? Someone comes in and says, I've got terrible abdominal pain. Okay, let's go figure that out. Let's find the answer to the question that you just asked me, which is what's going on. So my mom both my parents are big readers. My house was filled with books growing up, and a huge chunk of them for my mom were all mysteries. And so I was raised with mysteries. I love at Christmas time when we all get together, we do puzzles, we do mystery games, whodunit stuff. We played Clue all the time. Like it's always just been how I was raised of let's try to solve a problem together. So it came very naturally to write books like that too.
Yeah, that sounds like a fun Christmas time.
Yeah,
I would
totally.
definitely want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
This is kind of an extra question, but do you have any middle grade mystery recommendations?
So I love, I don't know if you've ever read the book Holes by Louis Sachar or Sacher. Yeah. I've never known the correct pronunciation of his last name. If you read it, you'll look and say, oh, I can totally see that this influences Becca's writing, in that it has kind of two storylines side by side. You're not sure what's going on. There's kind of a magical element to things that can't really happen in the real world, but they're happening to these kids. And there's an element of history affecting the present and the mystery of how does this all fit together. So that is a book I absolutely adore. What other mysteries do I love? The Parker Inheritance is fantastic. It is a book about, again, it has a historical element and two kids trying to figure out the story of their family and what happened before. And that's, again, what I'm writing right now is a book that is a girl who has been told one story of what happened to her mother, but she does not think that's really what happened. So she and her cousin are trying to figure out what really happened to mom. So those are some of my favorites. I'm sure if you gave me, I can send you a whole list on Twitter once I take a think about it.
Yeah. I know that I have a feeling that you're a big reader. I just wanted to add a mystery book recommendation by a really good author that I really like. So the book is called Aggie Morton Mystery Queen. There are 3 books in the series. The 4th is coming out in October. It sounds like I'm promoting the author, but it is a really good book.
I'm all for it. Wonderful. I read a ton with my youngest son still to this day. He's 13 and still we love to read books together. So I will write that down. That sounds fantastic.
So, is there a book you've read from any point in your life that's just stayed with you? A book that really made you think or feel strongly about a certain topic?
Absolutely. I think actually the one that comes to mind immediately. Oh, so here's Parker Inheritance.
Oh,
This is the one I was talking about earlier.
I love that cover.
It's such a good book. It's wonderful by Varian Johnson. He's awesome. But this is the one I've read in the last couple years, 2-3 years, that those books where you don't want a last page because you don't want to stop. You don't want to bring it to an end. And this is that book for me in the recent past. So it's called Sweet, the story of a girl and her monster. And it is it's by Jonathan Auxier, and it is a girl who's a chimney sweep in London in the 1800s. She's an orphan and lives amongst the orphan sweeps, and her monster is a lump of coal that then grows into this creature sitting next to her. And it's just, that doesn't sound like a great story the way I've described it, but it is stunningly good. And I just loved it. I have nothing but amazing things to say about it.
Well, it sounds like an amazing book. And if you're the author of The Missing Piece of Charlie O'Reilly, one of my favorite reads, then I know that your recommendations, I'll definitely want to read them.
Excellent.
So do you have any current or future book ideas brewing?
The one that I had mentioned before with I don't have a title for it at this point. It's set in 1908, transposition there, in an inn in Maine. And it's her and her father who have lived there. The inn has been closed ever since the death of her mother, and they now need to reopen for financial reasons. And so all of a sudden she starts having people in her world again and being social again. And she has very little practice at that. And I feel like we all can identify with that particular theme right now. How do we interact with human beings again after years of not being very good at it? So that's what I'm picking away at right now. I had a draft and I had to basically kind of push it aside, and I'm starting over with kind of a different thrust to the story. So this one is definitely so far been the most challenging of my books, but just all you can do is sit down each day and start working on it.
Yeah, that's a great philosophy. And I've just tried so many books. It's kind of hard to just sit down and like get your mind just in the flow of writing a book.
Yeah. And, I would say, especially to young writers, always remember, writing is not limited to the time that your fingers are on your computer. Writing happens when you're walking the dog. Writing happens when you're in the shower. Writing happens on a long car drive if you're willing to put your phone down. Let your mind wander to the places of your story that maybe you haven't figured out, or I don't know what's going to happen next. And those are the times where really cool stuff can happen. And then you can scribble a note or make a voice record on your phone. And then when you do sit down the next time, you have a spark. You have something you can chase.
Yeah, that does sound like a great way to think about it. Like there's inspiration everywhere you look. I like that idea.
Correct. Yeah. Because just staring at a blank page is not very inspiring. So find it as you go, and then try to kind of double back.
Unless you want to write about like the snow in a white page with
a polar bear.
Yeah.
And an igloo.
So now it's time for my final question. The question I ask every single one of my guests, and I usually get some pretty interesting and unique answers. If you could be any character in any book, who would you be and why?
So it's funny, you had given me a little heads up on that. So I was talking to my sons this morning and I said, this is an interesting question. Who would I be? And one of my 16-year-old sons goes, well, obviously Dumbledore. It was just like, duh. And I said, well, I probably am not wise enough or quiet enough to be Dumbledore. I'm probably more of a Hermione as far as like super like sassy pants and thinks she knows too much. That would be more like it. But the more I actually thought about the answer, it's funny that we actually already talked about this, because I think my answer is actually Nan from this book, in that she has this amazing, loyal friend that is there for her without question, and is able to let her become her best self with his friendship. So that is actually who I would be, is Nan.
You know, I was a little worried you'd choose Hermione, because 3 out of like my first 7 people who I've interviewed, they've said Hermione or Dumbledore, somebody like that. So I was a little worried, but
I had to jump off of that and said, well, here's the first part of it, but here's the real answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do really need to read Sweep. You recommended it so many times over the course of this interview, so I know that I have to read it. Mom, I have to read Sweep. So yeah, that's all, folks. My guest today has been Rebecca K.S. Ansari. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. This is always fun to talk books, and I'm again just so impressed with what you're doing for the middle grade audience and reader.
So to all of you listening, you can follow Rebecca K.S. Ansari on Twitter, and you can check out her website. I'm going to post the website links and stuff in the description, so be sure to check that out. And, well, that's my interview. Thank you so much for coming today, Rebecca, and I'll see you next time, everybody. Bye.